and streamed live, and the recording and transcript will be published afterwards on the States Assembly website. Please ensure that all electronic devices, including mobile phones, could be switched to silence. And we'll begin with introductions. My name is Deputy Hilary Jearn, and I'm the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel.
Deputy Thomas Coles, Vice Chair.
Constable David Johnson, Panel Member.
Connétables.
Constable Mike Jackson, Assistant Minister of Environment and Chair of the Comité Connétables.
Sue de Grouchy, Secretary to the Comité des Connétables.
Sarah Parkin, Parish Secretary to the Comité des Connétables.
Susanna Ramos, Chief Vet.
Amanda Ingram, Animal Health Officer with the Environment Department.
Thank you. And of course, we're having this hearing today because the principles have been part of the amendments to the dog law. The committee, the panel felt that we needed to call it in to go on some specific areas that we would like to discuss that we raised during the state's hearing. And so, first of all, I'd like to ask that the panel understands that from the last public hearing that the amendments being brought forward to the Dogs Law 1961 was based upon changes brought to the UK equivalent legislation. What analysis did the committee undertake on the effectiveness and outcomes of the UK Dangerous Dogs Law Act of the UK?
Well, I think we've gone back and it's well documented that there have been significant injuries as a result of the situation in the UK up to a certain time. We've taken that on board. We've looked at France, and I think that a reasonable analysis would tell anyone that Jersey needs to do something to align itself with the two jurisdictions closest to our geographical position. And
so was your analysis that the UK Dangerous Dogs Act was introduced has reduced the amounts of incidences? So has that analysis been done to know that the law was done in a way that is...
Well, I think it's fair to say that it has, but let me ask the State's Vet to comment on that.
So it's really difficult to assess. So there has been serious incidents after the law has been implemented in the UK, but they are mainly at people's homes. So that's where it becomes very difficult to legislate. So whilst this, which probably you cannot say that it has reduced immensely the number of incidents in the UK, you can certainly say that the more recent incidents are within people's homes, and there's less evidence of incidents, outside in public areas, which is what we're trying to achieve here.
And was that before the Act was brought in the UK? There was incidences in the public, so that has reduced that.
There has been incidents outside in the UK in public before the law, and at least the ones that are being publicised lately in the UK are within people's own homes, which is, as I said, I think very difficult to regulate.
And was there any Jersey-specific evidence that the committee relied upon in developing these specific amendments, or is it really taking from the Dangerous Dogs Act? Was there anything Jersey-specific?
I think it's fair to say it's taken from the UK experiences and other jurisdictions as well.
And we were just talking about the fact that there's lots of incidences in, more in people's homes, and this is something the JSPCA raised in the letter to us as well, concerning this. Is there anything further in other jurisdictions or in Jersey was considered about that situation, about protecting especially children in the homes?
We did discuss that through developed law, and there was suggestions of extending muzzling, extending other of the controls, but we thought that would be unfair in terms of it would be a bit unfair in terms of animal welfare potentially, and also when do you stop in people's homes is very difficult to regulate and almost impossible to enforce. But there are provisions here regarding the 18-year-olds and not being left alone, that being animals being at home in a secure environment, that are trying to address some of the concerns. But I think there's a limit to what you can regulate within individual households, I'm afraid.
So do you think that these amendments then are proportionate to the scale of the risk in Jersey? So the ones that are put here.
We think it is, and we think it's the most pragmatic way to do it. In a way that is relatively quick to do, and hopefully will achieve a degree of risk mitigation. Yes.
Connétables, does the committee feel the same, that this is proportionate?
I think absolutely. The reality is that the numbers predicted are small, but the measures that are being proposed to regulate the import of dogs, and this is what we're talking about, we're not talking about dangerous dogs out of control here, and that needs to be really fully understood. It's about the regulation at entry into the island, and if this is proposed, the reality is that in, I'm saying 10, 12 years, we won't have a problem in the island. But at the moment, there is a risk. And from my point of view, I'm not prepared to countenance the existing risk with these dogs. And it's my focus is on children. Yes, dog welfare is important, and I'm fully empathetic to that. But children's welfare is the priority.
And is there currently any XL bully type dogs in Jersey that display behaviour that could be considered risk in the to the public?
There are certainly XL bully type dogs in Jersey. I don't know necessarily for us that we've been involved. No, I haven't seen one XL bully in Jersey that came to us, but the police may have a different view on. I think. And the police may have a different view, and they have different data. I think there were certainly incidents involving the XL bully type dogs, but they probably weren't measured at the time to see if they would, they would conform exactly. But visually, I think there were incidents, but it's they may not have been exactly measured to standard.
So, in response to our letter, you confirmed that a non-breed specific model that was focused on owner responsibility, mandatory training and behaviour-based controls could address root causes of dangerous dog incidences, but would require more time, resources and regulatory change. Given this, why did the committee decide not to pursue a phased or resource transition towards the more effective root cause model?
I didn't mean to say that it would definitely more effective. It's really difficult, and internationally there's countries that adopt ABSL breed specific. There's countries that don't. In both types of countries, you have increases on incidents with certain types of dogs. So there isn't the right model. But what we were trying to do here, it was something that we pragmatic, quick to implement. I think the danger is if we look at things that are really complex to achieve, complex to inform, complex to assess, then you're going to delay the process, and you may not achieve. You may have either equivalent conclusions or actually achieve less of a risk mitigation. And I think that's the danger. So behavior is complex. It's multifactorial. A dog may behave lovely, fantastically all the time, but there is that day, that trigger. And if that dog is able to then cause a massive damage or a massive injury to a person, that's where the difficulties come. And we think that this is the most pragmatic way to do it at the moment.
And is there considered, or is there other jurisdictions that do like a hybrid approach where it's?
There are some jurisdictions do a hybrid approach. There are some jurisdictions that do totally one way or totally the other. But as I said before, there isn't a perfect answer for this issue, I don't think.
So the JSPCA raised concerns about restrictions on dogs and the impact on exercise, limits on socialisation, which could increase stress, and unmet needs and reactivity of dogs. How have any indirect consequences on these dogs and their behaviour factored into the proposed changes? So specifically looking at their restrictions. So
there is no restrictions on walking. It restrictions on they have to be under control. They have to be muzzled, but there's no restrictions on how far, how long they can walk. There's no restrictions on socialisation as long as the same measures are done. There's no restrictions on training. We on purpose didn't consider the dogs to be banned, so so there is trying to take that negative stigma and allowing for training and insurances and that type of things continue to be taken in place for this type of dogs. So I don't think there's a massive impact if people comply with what is required in terms of training is still possible, socialization is still possible, walking is still possible. So just kind of tidying up this area of trying to work out which
approach, you chose this approach. What I'm hearing is that you're saying that this approach chosen is because it's quicker. It could be just as if the other approach, the wide approach, could still have the same effect. It could still be the same amount. So it's a case of needing to be faster rather than it being.
It's a risk assessment, isn't it? And do you need to be, quick? You do it quickly or not? The impact may be quite similar if you go one way or the other. At least, that's kind of the evidence. But yes, and it is a less complex way to look at it at the moment that we're trying.
I think it's worth emphasising the point in training. And yes, we can insist dogs go through training processes. Some dogs will tick the box, others won't. And a lot of it, of course, is about owner training rather than dog training. And this is something that's really difficult to deal with.
And finally, Connétables, I think it was something that I wanted to just pick up again because you had said, what's important is about children's welfare and the rights of the child and ensuring that, this is about protecting children. But of course, we've heard from the State's Vet that a lot of the attacks potentially that we've seen in the UK are now based in home. And I was wondering what considerations there is on that. Like what could be the next steps involved in that? Because of course there is this situation where we can see that it won't protect.
No, I think it's a risk. It is a risk at the moment, and one can mitigate that risk in the longer term by implementing these amendments, so that risk will be much diminished if the dogs aren't in the island. At the moment, for the next 10 years, I think there will be a risk.
But I also think that is people's choices, isn't it? You choose to have a dog of certain type. Your neighbor's child doesn't choose to interact or not with that dog. So I think there's a degree of personal choice in here. And I agree, and we have to admit that personal choice is very difficult to regulate. I think you would probably agree. So.
Well, thank you, and I'm moving to Deputy Coles.
Thank you. Moving on to process the consultation and legislative gaps. The panel has received confirmation from both the JSPCA and the States of Jersey Police that no consultation was conducted with either body on the proposed amendments, despite holding statutory responsibilities directly affected by them. Can the committee explain why the amendments were developed without engagement from the island's principal animal welfare body or the police?
Well, if I can address the police issue first, and I would just add in at this point, we met both parties on Tuesday and had a very good meeting, roundtable meeting. With regard to the police, the difficulty there is that they don't have a dog unit anymore. Rightly or wrongly, one could argue the point that it was a regrettable decision. In that if you look at Article 10 of the existing law, or 11 I think it is, they have an obligation to deal with dangerous dogs out of control. And I think I make that point quite strongly because that is the point. And they did have an incident a few weeks ago whereby they took in a dog for those reasons which they felt were necessary, and they brought in a dog unit, best described as from the UK, to deal with it because they felt there was a risk. In discussion on Tuesday, it's felt that should these situations arise, which it is anticipated will be relatively few, that would be the most cost-effective way of dealing with it. And they would deal with that within their own resources. So going back to the JSPCA, they are a welfare organisation, there's no question about that, and their views were explained around the table. Once again, it was a question of can they accommodate dangerous dogs out of control? That they probably haven't got the facility for doing that. I think someone needs to, and it's for us to investigate with other kennels around the island whether there is capacity to do that, and we feel that there is. So if the JSPCA don't want to do it, we already have a contract with them to take in, to seize dogs who are lost or missing. Or, well, missing, they wouldn't be missing because they wouldn't have found them, but those that are found will be taken in by the JSPC under our contract. That's something we're about to renew and discuss with them. So we'll have to understand what their limitations are so that there is provision for taking dogs which may be deemed dangerous into kennelling whilst their owners are located.
But shouldn't this all occurred before Tuesday, and in the sense that this is at least a 6-week lodging period, and they should have been consulted and engaged with, and all this known before it got to this stage of lodging amendments?
There was engagement actually that States Vet.
Can I just add
the
something
dates.
else? Is that GSPC have no enforcement powers or responsibilities, and they are not mentioned in the law by name. And I think that's important to address. And whilst there may not have been formal consultation, we were certainly open with GSPCA in several discussions we had ahead of the lodging of the legislation.
And where would when the legislation was lodged, where was the idea of this kennel capacity come from to be able to house if it wasn't?
So the kennel capacity discussion actually happened when we engaged with States of Jersey Police as well in a kind of three-way discussion, and that's when it came across that there was more. The gap was probably bigger than we initially anticipated. We do have an excellent relationship with GSPCA, but I think it wasn't always clear to us as well that they wouldn't accept. Certain types of dogs. I think that evolved through discussion, not necessarily from the starting point, if I can be fair.
I think it's worth noting that in the dogs law 11.7, the dog seized under paragraph 2 or 4 shall be transferred to and detained as an establishment suitable to the reception of dangerous dogs, including any premises in the ownership or control of the States of Jersey Police Force, and dealt with thereafter in accordance with the law. And I think it's fair to say that that's the presumption that the police have capacity to do that. Clearly they don't, and I think they are looking to how they can put something more formally in place to be prepared for the situation should it arise.
Yes, so, sorry, going to help on. I mean, where are we in that? I mean, they're looking to do it. Are we in timetables?
At this moment in time, and as a result of an experience a few weeks ago, they would utilise a unit. I think the last one they used was from Hampshire. But they have arrangements with whether it's Hampshire, Devon, Cornwall or other jurisdictions in the UK. And at the moment, the suggestion was on Tuesday that they would look to be doing that.
And just to understand, that means that until they come on, until they get here, there is nobody. What happens to the dog? I suppose that's my first question. So what happens and what will happen in the future until somebody that is trained and is able to take care of the dog gets here from the UK? And then secondly, do they then take the dog out of Jersey? So this will be where the facilities will be. But I'm just wondering, until they're able to get here, what happens? What is the kind of intermediary? And then, of course, yes,
I think every case would have to be judged on its merits and gravity. Initially, the ideal solution is the dog goes back to its owner. Now, the judgment call would have to be made, in my view, by the police as to whether that owner is fit and proper to take the charge, take the dog back into their charge. And that is the optimum solution. And it might need that that owner will need some education in how best to deal with this particular animal. In a worst case scenario, the judgment would have to be probably based by, I suspect the State's Vet would have input, and what the ultimate situation with the dog would be if it had to go to destruction. But that's the last thing anybody would want. In terms of welfare, we would have to consider how that dog would be housed, and there are other establishments on the island.
And you've talked to those other establishments?
We have, indeed.
Article 11B allows for a person to make representations to the Magistrates' Court. Did the committee consult with the Magistrates' Court in relation to this proposed change?
So that's no different to the existing provision in terms of making a representation to the Magistrates' Court if a dog is believed to be dangerously out of control. The dangerously out of control definition is already in the law as well. And so that is exactly the same provision as we have at present.
Do you believe that's commonly known and wide enough accepted by the public if they're making complaints about dogs or their owners?
Well, the process would be that a complaint would come to a duty centreneer. That's usually the first step of the ladder. Now, the duty centreneer will make a decision as to whether it can be dealt with at parish hall level or whether it needs to be escalated further to the States of Jersey Police and subsequently, if there is a case to answer, to the Magistrates' Court. So there is a process for dealing with it.
Okay. What changes will the committee make to its process for future legislation with public safety implications to ensure cross-agency engagement?
I think that's important, and we in turn have been in discussion with the Customs Department, given that they will probably be the first agency who may be involved should someone try to import an animal which doesn't always within the list that's being proposed. So it's subsequently it may run to the police. I'm not sure what point the JSPCA would become involved, but initially it would be Customs and Police, I would have thought, and JSPCA further down the line. And then, of course, any other kennels, should they be involved.
So I'm just tracking through the question plan because you answered quite a few of our questions previously. So one of the big ones is about what contingencies exists in key enforcement infrastructure if they're not in place by January.
Well, I think there are provisions in place in terms of general kenneling of dogs which may be seized. It's not to say that seized dogs will be dangerous. So the JSPCA do, under our contract, provide that. And their contract is fairly broad. In fact, what does it say, Sue, in terms of...
Yes, so the contract is for the collection and housing of stray dogs, and they have confirmed that that would include a dog of a type that is then known as dangerous, provided it isn't out of control. They have recently, but only recently, raised concerns about dogs that are deemed dangerously out of control at the point at which they're called to collect. And so we're working that through with them in terms of what that means and what other provisions need to be put in place, which have already been covered.
It's worth mentioning at this point, and this came out of the discussions the other day, in terms of a kennel for a dangerous dog, will probably involve a two-door kennel. As you can imagine, one door and the dog could be gone. So that's something that we would need to be content that is in place, and we'll work with either JSPCA, who bearing in mind are an organisation funded by contributions, and I think we would always be supportive of what goes on in that and the public support for them. But it may be they may wish to upgrade their kennels to that extent. Also, they may wish to have trained staff to be able to deal with dogs who are more dangerous than others.
Okay.
We're talking about things that potentially need more resources, and especially even with the police, they have no dog unit potentially. I don't know what the decision was. Maybe that was related to resources as well. What resources are you envisaging to support these organisations and etc. to be able to actually implement this enforcement?
Well, bearing in mind the numbers involved will not be great, and that experience has dictated. We haven't seen any apart from one in a few weeks ago, which had an allied issue, which has now been resolved in that particular dog wasn't taken in, but it was returned to the owner after discussions. I think it would be wise within the island to have kennels available to us as the Comité, or whether they be with the JSPCA or others, doesn't really matter. But I think it's wise that there is something in the island, and it's something I think the police would need to have access to as well, within so they can comply with the laws as in statute at the moment.
And the police in their letter to us said that, questioned about the definition of police officer within the law. Could you just confirm what that means? Are we talking about honorary police as well?
It means
or?
both, and I think they were, say, misinformed in the comment that I saw. A police officer includes States of Jersey Police and honorary police.
So the honoraries will be in a position to also be able to seize a dog?
They are, in effect, usually the ones that do, truthfully. And once again, that goes back to our contract with the JSPCA. They will effectively give the JSPCA a call. If they find a dog roaming, the JSPCA will come and pick it up, take it into their kennels. If they can't find the owner in short time.
I understand this, but we're now talking about dangerous dogs. And at the moment, we've got letters from both stakeholders that you've mentioned to say they are not trained or have the facilities to be able to pick up a dangerous, to take a dangerous dog in and then do that. So we're just trying to work out, I think
we're mixing concepts again.
Exactly.
I think there is the dogs out of control. That there's always been a provision for that in the legislation, and that hasn't changed. So whatever gaps we have now, we had 2 or 3 years ago. So this is probably there is a gap, but this is not been increased by these proposed changes. On the other side, so any dog can be dangerously out of control, from a Chihuahua to a Pit Bull. Yes, which you shouldn't have, but that's what. And then you have the addition of the dangerous dogs as defined by the legislation, which is the only addition in terms of enforcement to this legislation. That, at least, I have a simple way to think about things, yeah. So, yes, but what we expect, so the proposals for conditions are supposed to be pragmatic and acceptable, and we assume, or rightly or wrongly, the majority of the people will comply with the law. That's a logical assumption. So there may be a couple that won't, so it's not going to be a massive amount, and they would be treated as they would any potentially any dangerous out of control dog would be. So it's a small change of addition to the current enforcement of legislation, but it's really small. So this, if it's going to probably, what you're trying to say is, yes, there is a small kind of increase on the enforcement requirements, but the rest hasn't changed.
I think we were interpreting those letters was they were saying maybe that the step over to the dangerous dogs and the fact that they are, as you've talked about, why you're putting restrictions in, because they are dangerous and bigger and could cause more harm, that are they willing to take that extra step in that category that is now going to be defined as dangerous dogs if they are not complying with the restrictions that you're saying. And I think that's where we are trying to get to the hub of understanding in the questions related to the fact that we're bringing over a dog unit from the UK, what happens before the UK unit gets here, how do you kennel, etc. It's about the dangerous dogs, I understand.
And there is a difference when you are holding a dog for 24, 48 hours whilst a unit comes from the UK. The welfare and the requirements you need, you can hold them in a slightly harsher way if it's a very small amount of time waiting for a unit. And that's different from holding a dog, dangerous or any dog, for, whilst the court takes a decision, could be 1 week or 3 months. We don't know. So I think it's important to do that difference. Whilst some may not be willing to take a dog for a longer time, I think you're much more likely to have other organizations, including potentially to take a dog for a very small amount of time. For example, waiting for a unit. It's a slightly, it's a different perspective as well in terms of the duration of the kenneling in this case.
I think there's the point, obviously you said that these gaps existed in the previous legislation as well, but obviously that legislation came in the 90s, and obviously we've seen the decline of the other banned breeds on that list. So we've basically had about 30 years of a point where we've had police and the JSPCA on that decline of needing to manage a dangerous dog, because like you said, we've got them now, maybe in 10 years' time, we won't have the XL bully type dog. So we've got like that complacency time. Then actually when you've then come to introduce this new banned breed onto the legislation, there was the point you should have been feeding in to close that gap, to make it more functional in that point before introducing, because you have had that time?
I suppose that because there have been, I think I mentioned a case a couple of weeks ago, which could have gone in a different direction. That's the truth. It was a police matter which they dealt with, and the dog was repatriated with its owners, which is an ideal situation. It's like all these risk mitigation moves, and I suppose it's a question of how much provision do you put in place. I don't think it would be a bad idea to have a kennel in place to which the police could use should the need arise. That kennel could be used for other things at other times. I don't think it can be 100% dedicated. You have to think the costings through. But some kennels will be able to provide that should they so wish. There will be a cost.
And is the committee the one who will be leading to find those facilities, or is this, once this law is done, is that implementation pass over to the police and the resourcing needs to come from
I think
police?
it's as Tom mentioned, it's cross-departmental working is necessary, and if it is going to save the police money by them not having to bring over a unit from the UK, that must be attractive, and maybe their budget could contribute to that. I think that's an area for further discussion.
Could I just add to that? We have had discussions with local service providers that currently would be prepared to take on a dangerous dog, whether or not it was out of control, and same for any dog that would be dangerously out of control. So there is that, the gap in the puzzle is being put together. There is that, whether it be short term or potentially longer term, before that unit from the UK did, if it was needed, if that helps to bridge that puzzle. And the owner that we have spoken to that has these kennels would be prepared to do that willingly, and it has the equipment that she needs to do to get there.
Would you be signing then an MOU? Would this become
That's
more
what
official?
we are looking at,
Yeah.
putting something formal in place. Yes.
I mean, it's fair to say you start to think through what might the risks be. One is that police might be called to an incident where the dog's owner could find themselves, should we say, being incarcerated for whatever reason, and they're left with a dog to deal with. And I think that's probably the area they were looking at. And so it is a question of interdepartmental talking and understanding what's needed, and we're quite happy to work with them.
I mean, that leads on to one of the questions that was raised in the debate in the Assembly about rehoming dangerous dogs. If you find yourself in a situation, because the legislation says that you can't rehome a dangerous dog, but actually if in the event, like I said, somebody becomes incarcerated, nothing to do with the dog, but completely something subjective, the dog's not caused any issue, what happens to that dog?
I think the first attempt is probably to try the nearest family. I don't know what it.
I think there are provisions legislated on the proposal, as I understand it, that the court can decide otherwise if there is family member or if there is someone close or someone suitable to rehome that dog. So whilst rehoming in the general concept is forbidden, it is allowed in the new proposal in certain circumstances and will be decided by court, which we think is probably the fairest way to do it.
So even if it's somebody who, I don't know, somebody who's fit and healthy but suddenly has a stroke,
Yes.
they're no longer able to, it would
Yes.
still have to be the court that would decide that that dog can be rehomed.
Yes, well, yes.
Yes,
it will
and that's
be,
specifically in Article 11B, it's amended. So the magistrates' court, a representation can be made to the magistrates' court. This is in relation to a dog that's dangerously out of control, but it also extends to where the registered owner of the dangerous dog has died or otherwise cannot look after that dangerous dog. So the representations are made from all parties to the magistrates' court, who then determines the appropriate options.
In the instance that if it was a personal representation to the magistrates' court, obviously that carries, it's a small fee, but it's still a fee. But if somebody is actually unable to afford to keep the dog anymore, obviously that becomes a barrier to be able to doing that down that magistrate's process.
I assume.
I don't know what the magistrate's view would be on that. I mean, it effectively, the cost of a dog is not insignificant, and a lot of these dogs will cost £2,000 or £3,000.
This is what I'm saying. If somebody can no longer has lost their job or whatever's happened, they can no longer afford to
Yeah.
look after that dog. They realise it's in the best interest of the dog to pass it on to someone who can afford to do it. Obviously, because neglect is when we start seeing more and more problems with all animals. And actually, to overcome that, they're a responsible dog owner. They've realised, I can't afford to keep this dog anymore, but I don't have the £50-60 to pay the magistrate to make that decision.
Surely the person that wants to take the dog could do the representation. I don't know. I'm just thinking from a practical point of, and surely it could be, it's very difficult with animals, and you can't legislate for any eventuality. So the reason for that clause there is to actually not condemn necessarily the dogs to death, which was what we're trying to avoid, each case is a case. If the person doesn't have money but is still able to physically keep the dog, maybe they could keep the dog until someone else can afford to take it on. Each case is a case. It may be that those dogs not necessarily have to go anywhere. They may be kept in the house under the supervision of the wife instead of the husband. Each case is a case, isn't it? But this bit of on the legislation would be to allow. We try to go a bit further in not trying to condemn the dog to death immediately, as if to no fault of their own, if the owner is no longer able to keep it. So that's the logic.
Alternative to make an application to the parish hall, say, to transfer ownership of the dog.
Well, you can under 11B, which is now 11B4, if an owner dies, for instance. I mean, that could find, you can actually change ownership, so that can be transferred to someone else. So that's covered off. I think everyone will always try and help. Euthanisation is always a very last resort, and no one would want to condone that, but that is the backstop at the end of the day.
Thank you. Connétables.
Okay, yes. A few more general points. Leading on from what's been said before. Sorry, I'm just...
From 25.
I know, sorry, I just turned over the wrong page. Yeah, Article 5E, as to the breeding of dangerous dogs, prohibits breeding, requires dangerous dogs to be neutered when it is safe to do so. Do you expect that to cause problems where owners, again, plead financial hardship, they can't do so? Are the provisions... Would they be to force them to do so?
I think we've been quite open and transparent with the owners of XLV type dogs that this was going to be proposed. We've been talking about this for almost 2 years. I think, if you choose to have a dog, then you should be able to afford whatever is required to those dogs. People, if you have a dog, you pay, I don't know, £2,000, £3,000, you're expected then to be able to afford to provide for that dog. So I think the answer is, we did talk about it. We did talk about it. I think that's one of the reasons we try to be transparent about it, that that's what we're proposing, and should have given time to people to realize that this was going to happen and accept that and prepare for that eventuality.
Okay. Moving on to the requirement that dogs be muzzled. The JSPCA highlighted there'd be no uptake on the offering of muzzle training for owners.
That's people's decisions. The offer is there. If people don't want to do it, I think I can't force them to train the dog to be muzzled, because it's there. We're saying, and we've been quite transparent and open about it. To be honest, any responsible dog owner should muzzle train their dog. That's point one. If people don't choose to do it, it's their personal choice. For these types of dogs, we have been transparent to say that one of the proposals was to have the dog muzzled when in public. The offer for training is there. If people choose not to do it, it's...
I mean, the point we're making is the offer of training available?
Yes, GSPCA is offering a muzzle training.
According to my notes, there's been no uptake on the
Yes, that might arise, of course, if the legislation is approved. We shall have to see.
Or it may be that some of these owners have been responsible and already muzzle trained their dogs. One of the two things may have happened. I hope. I'm optimistic. You have to hope that people are responsible, I think.
And moving on to, it's already been touched on as well, what options will exist for owners who are no longer able to keep a dangerous dog under the new scheme? Is it contemplated that there's a structured rehoming exercise or mechanism available, or?
Well, it goes back to our point regarding kennelling earlier on, and obviously the preferred route is that it remains with the owner or those closely associated with the owner. As regards the route thereafter, I don't think there is anything in legislation one can put down apart from make provisions we've discussed earlier on in terms of kennelling with other agencies.
So it goes back to the other agencies. I mean, earlier on, reference was made to hasn't been a change in certain laws. What there has been, the look into this legislation has highlighted the fact that certain assumptions as to dog police training, etc., was still available, and they're not. And that's the gap we're trying to plug.
I think that's correct, and it has highlighted that. And I think from the police point of view, they've also understood that they have to think of other provision. Hence, the importing of a dog unit from the UK should the need arise.
Okay. Thank you. And in this
if I can just sharpen up on that, and I think the discussion we had on Tuesday was that they would try and formalise their arrangements with a provider in the UK to have it on tap.
We'll pick up request of formalisation later, presumably.
Sorry. Could I just add to Constable Matt Jackson was saying, these with these restrictions with these requirements that would come in place, it would be responsible rehoming if or whatever what would happen to that dog. We would be involved with that. It wouldn't be the owner of, for instance, an XL bully giving it to someone random who may not know how to look after it. These terms would actually almost protect that dog more than if these weren't in place, with the insurance, with the lead wearing, with being monitored under the remit of the SVO, which other dogs don't have that protection for their welfare purposes.
And when you say we, is that the committee? Or
I say that as in Jersey's authority unit, but would that be SOJP or the SVO?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the procedures that apply to or will apply should the legislation be approved would apply also to a transferee, if that's a word that could be used, and they would have to comply. And once again, the state's vet would be have the animal on her list and would ensure compliance. I think I'm right in saying, Susanna.
We would clarify conditions, but the enforcement, any enforcement sits with.
That would be directed to the centennier, and we saw a dog which had an order on it for muzzling fairly recently that was spotted out and about without said muzzle, and that was taken back to the owner was taken back to the magistrate's court, and a fine imposed, if I think I'm right in saying. So these things do get picked up, and I think in terms of enforcement, it will be down to the Honorary Police / States of Jersey Police to enforce that.
And do the Honorary Police know where the XL bullies are, in the sense of because of its being about measurements per se? Obviously, there's a potentially to not know, the dog they see in front of them, whether it needs to be requirements or not. And I'm wondering if there is that collaboration that will happen to ensure that there is.
Well, they will to a degree, in that they have access to the poodle system, as we call it, which is the new dog registration system, which was implemented a couple of years ago. All information that we have is on that, and they have access to it, as do all parish halls. Now, there's never 100% certainty that people have accurately filled it out. So if there is any doubt, there would be a call to the state's vets team to verify that that dog is compliant, if you like. If it's a bit borderline, I think that's the
So
view
I
you
think
take.
I think Sue and I discussed this to a great extent. So I'll let you.
Sorry, I just wanted to pick up on one of the other questions in terms of rehoming, just to emphasise that it is the magistrate's court that would ultimately make that decision based on representation for rehoming of a dog that is deemed to be of a dangerous dog type or breed. And coming on to identification of them, clearly they aren't identified anywhere at the moment because the legislation isn't here. We're aware that there are some XL bully type breeds on island, but none have been measured because we don't have the legislation. As soon as the legislation, or if the legislation is agreed, then there's a 30-day window for these dogs to be registered with the state's veterinary officer. We've already drafted a data sharing agreement to make sure that parishes and the state's veterinary officer can share data, and clearly the amendments to the dogs law include that when purchasing your dog licence, you have to declare if it is a type that is a dangerous dog. We will need to be marking that in our system, so to speak, and then yes, the information will be clearly available to those who have access, including parish honorary police for policing purposes.
And the idea is to have a cross-check, so the
Back in
the
time.
ones we have as registered as dangerous dogs,
Yeah.
will cross-check as appearing as dangerous type on the licensing system, and the communication should ensure that that is consistent.
Because it's a type dog and it's about measurements and things like that, if somebody gets a puppy, they don't quite know if that dog's going to
Correct.
grow into that size. So actually, I suppose we've got one of the challenges that all agents are going to face within this is, and potentially an owner who's willfully bought a puppy thinking it is a particular other type of breed, but then actually, they think they bought a little Staffordshire Terrier. And not everybody is sensible when they do their research about buying a dog. Puppy farms exist in the UK and people buy them from very strange places. That somebody might be register a puppy thinking that it was a Staffordshire Terrier, but actually it all of a sudden grows to a size, that it meets that minimum criteria. I suppose what flexibility is there within this legislation that person was negligent in the sense that they didn't do the research properly of what you should look for when you buy a puppy, and then they've actually ended up with this dog which then meets the criteria of
So
the
if
XL
the dog
bully.
is a recognised breed, it doesn't necessarily need, the standard doesn't apply. The standard is for dogs that are not of a breed but of a type. And then yes, if the dog grows and up to the standard requirement and then is assessed and has a considerable number of characteristics, then I'm afraid there is no flexibility. The flexibility is on assessing that dog if he on a number. So the assessment talks about defines a number of characteristics that are common to the standard. So if the dog does have that, then you would be treated as a dangerous type
But
dog.
I suppose what I'm asking about is around the consequence for the owner, because if the owner, this dog takes, say, 2 years to get to the size where it now meets the criteria of an XL bully, but they, in all, I don't want to say good faith, because you should do better research when you look for the dog
That
in the
would be
first
my
place.
answer to you. They
So-
should have done better, I'm
Yeah.
afraid. They are therefore not
So I suppose,
responsible owners.
is there a consequence for them for that 2 years where they misregistered that
No,
puppy?
I don't think so. I don't think we would work retrospectively. It can only work after you identify the dog as having the size. I don't think there will be a retrospective effect. It makes no sense. I think you would, if it's and if you measure a dog that looks like an XL bully but is too small because only 12 months, we would remeasure it at 18 months. And we can do that adjustment. But I don't think there'll be retroactive effects. I don't think that can be.
Does that mean then that, in fact, you could register a dangerous dog, attach it to a dog licence at any point? It doesn't have to necessarily be when you buy the dog.
There's a declaration on the licence which you would, if you gave false information, you would be perjuring yourself. And
I think your question is. I think your question is different. I think you're asking. So the dog license is every year.
Yes.
So if he may not be an XL bully on year 1, and he
Yes.
may be an XL bully on year 2, that would be
Or 6 months in, because you were saying 18 months, so
In
it's not in
between.
the year. If it's in between, can there be a registration
I think
during
what
the
we,
year.
what we would do in that case is communicate with, even if it's not in the system as being an Excel bully type, we would communicate with parishes to, to that effect, to confirm that that dog was now a dog of that type.
I think likewise, if a dog came in, or an owner came in to register a dog in January, and if they were concerned or questioning, we would talk to the state's vet to get that verified.
I think where I'm trying to get at is the database able to be adjusted during the year so that any changes to could be.
Yes, I'm sure we can, but if I could draw your attention to Article 5B, which is the prohibition on owning an unregistered dog, which provides that you must register it within 30 days, starting on the day the person acquires the dog, or if they've owned it from birth, the day of its birth, or in the case of a type of dog that becomes a dangerous dog after the person acquired it, the day on which the type becomes a dangerous dog. So the provision has been put in there to hopefully pick all those up. And of course, if we back step to the customs import and export licence order, these are dogs for which a person needs an import licence to bring in. So unless it's bred on island, they should have had the import licence when bringing it in. And back to your question about have they done appropriate research to identify whether it is a type that would fall within this legislation. Clearly, they ought to be doing that at the point at which they go off island to acquire a dog and to obtain their import licence under that order, or in fact just to fill in their documentation for customs because they are importing a dog to the island, and customs do follow up on those.
Before I move on to control dog framework for the future, one small question on the information displayed on dog tags, which that was informed by data protection concerns. Who do we receive the advice from on that?
Well, there were two elements really. One is in conversation with the data, the officer of the, what do they call themselves? Office of the Information Commissioner. And the conversation was that it would be a good idea if we could alter the legislation to take the addresses out. I think my point was slightly focused more on the physical side of it, because as we know, addresses can be quite long and convoluted. And if you take a small dog, and I've got experience of this, the tag is the size of a penny. You just can't get it all on, which tends to mean that most people don't comply. So rather than perpetuate that situation, it seems sensible to use the new system, which we've got, the Poodle system I referred to, and just put the number on. So it's name of dog, telephone number and registration number. All the necessary information is linked to that registration number, to which parish halls and police have access.
And I've heard that there are now, with technology, you're able to put a QR code, for example, and then you were able to scan the QR code, and then you were able to get all the information, a form very, lots of information about the dog with a QR code. And has there been any discussions about that, where it's, beyond that, so you can have this QR code and then you have access to lots of information, and it can be the size of a penny?
I have had it, in fact, it came out of a police meeting from one of my honorary police the other day, and I don't think we're there yet, but I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be in time. I don't know how long it would take us to get to that point, but it just seemed, this seemed one step forward, if you like, and whether how easily that could be added, I don't know. Sue, thoughts on that?
I think we would have to explore that a little further. I think my concern would be if it's a QR code reader that anybody has, that you've got more information being available to everybody, whereas the dog licence number is clearly something that's accessible to the
But you've
parish
chosen
and
what you put on the information. I mean, it's your
yes,
choice,
you
which
could-
of course
you-
at data
absolutely,
protection, it's all about you.
A person could choose to do that, yes. And if a person chooses to make that information available, then that's entirely up to them. We haven't looked at QR codes yet. But
And it's fair to say that if people want to keep their address on their existing tags, that's fine. So there's no change until after, January next year, when the new registrations take place. There's no need for existing dog owners to change their tags whatsoever.
in fact, you won't need to change your tag unless your address or phone number changes, in which case the information on the collar will be out of date. So do put the new information on.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, and two general questions to one FMA. During the last public hearing, as I recall, the committee agreed to conduct a review of the general control of dogs, which I think we agreed is scattergun all over the place. Can you detail what you intend to cover in that review and when you might wish to do so?
I think, firstly, I might just talk to the issue of dog walkers. I know it's a matter we've mentioned, and Susanna has a plan for that. Can you just talk to that?
So the dog walkers, as we've said before, is something that they will be licensed under an order under the new proposed new animal welfare law, and that should come into place as in when, if the law is accepted. But that's for professional dog walkers only.
So I didn't quite understand what is being done about that then.
They'll be licensed. The dog walkers will be licensed, and within that license, the numbers would be.
Okay.
But I don't know what sort of numbers you were thinking of. whether it would be
So again, this is in proposal phase. So we were looking at maximum, I think, is 5 dogs, insurance, display, their license, conditions, dogs kept always under control. Conditions on the vehicle. I don't think you want to go to that detail. That's the type of training. Capable person, etc. That's the type of things.
I'm pleased to hear that. I'm sure it accords to what the panel were thinking. But will that be a separate exercise, or will you be?
I think it'll be, well, my understanding is once the animal welfare law goes through the states, that will come in soon
That will
after.
come into roughly at the same time or slightly
So
after.
it'll be done within this term and hot on the heels of the animal welfare law?
Well, it depends how quick you, or if the welfare law is approved. So I'm afraid that's out of my hands.
I'm sure the panel will be very cooperative in bringing that forward if required.
But you're
Yeah.
saying it's an order?
It's an order, yes.
Okay, so there's not going to be a amendment to the animal, from your side?
No. So
Not
the new the proposed new animal welfare law is proposing that the minister can sign orders for certain parts of it. One of them is on licensing. So license will cover a lot of different activities. So breeders, sanctuaries, boarding kennels, and dog walker, professional dog walker.
I mean, if there were a delay in that, an alternative would be simply to bring an amendment to the policing regulations for parks and beaches in very simple terms.
That's possible too. I mean, we, as you know, I think almost every year we have a debate about the policing of beaches and the restrictions placed summer and winter.
I realise I'm trying to confine to this one area of dog
but
walkers.
I think it's possible. Yes, indeed.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
As we develop that policy, we'll share it with this panel to see if you've got any input on it. I think we're all keen to get that moving.
Okay, and what I think might be my final question, right? Beyond administrative alignment, would any practical or enforcement aspects of the registration scheme be compromised if the regulations did not come into force in time for the January 2026 dog licensing cycle?
Yes, I think we would probably miss a year in terms of people having to register dogs and putting the right information down. The chances are we wouldn't have the correct information. Would you take that step?
Yes, I think the provisions in the law in Article 2, as amended, require an applicant to declare whether a dog is a dangerous dog and provide details when applying for a dog licence. So if it's not in force for the bulk renewal for the dogs that we do have on island, then we would be missing that information for that year.
Can I also add something? Because not just about registration, but we know we have these dogs. We know they can breed. The longer it takes, the more we'll have. And the bigger problem we'll have, the more likelihood of incidents we'll have, and the more enforcement problems, and the more strengthening of the gaps that we already know that we have will happen. So I think that's an important consideration in terms of timing.
And you believe that that even though that you've been talking to the owners, that this will happen,
Yes.
and therefore the only way to be able to do it is to put legislation in
Yes.
place. And I think, so they will then comply with that legislation.
At least if they don't comply, the enforcement powers will be there to make them comply.
And I think that's where scrutiny has been
Yeah.
concerned, is that it was not clear, both when we see in the report of the legislation, when it first came to us, that bit on enforcement was very short, and it didn't give us that information. And then, of course, as scrutiny has been receiving letters of concern to say that bit is something that we weren't, we needed information to understand, because of exactly that is that if there's not understanding now of the situation, and so there's not the idea of doing those restrictions now voluntarily, it has to be done through a legislative means, but if there's not the enforcement there, and it's not seen that there is enforcement and it will be enforced, there could be that carrying on potentially, and that is could be that's a real concern. And I think that's where the panel is trying to get to, is to understand that there is the meat behind.
I think we've already discussed that we proactively try to advise people to do certain things, and they haven't. So that shows that you need a legal framework to force, to guide people in the right direction.
It's mandatory, so it's...
Well, yes, I went to say force, but I thought I was too mean. So.
Just going back to David's point, in the proposed animal welfare draft, animal welfare law, Part 7, general provisions and Article 34 orders, has the potential to cover it off, and so that will say it'll refer to relating to any matter required or permitted by this law to be prescribed or specified by order. So I think when we get to the detail of that is encompassed by those words.
Yes, again, going back to an earlier comment, I'm concerned that we arrived at this situation because of the perhaps lack of understanding or clarity as to whether magistrates control of dogs come within animal welfare and therefore under environment, or through the committee. That continues to be a grey area, I'm afraid.
Fully clear, I think it's fair to say, and I think we probably all agree with that.
But I think the mitigation for that is that we continue to discuss and get to two things in parallel, and if gaps are identified, then we'll look to mitigate them in one way or another. The important thing about animal welfare for Lloyd, yes, you can only do things that are directly animal welfare related, and the professional dog walkers, there's precedent for boarders, for groomers, etc. So it's there. We can do that. For the rest of the things, then we'll have to see where it fits. But I think it has been agreed that potentially fits with the dogs legislation if you're going to go any further.
Okay.
That's far to go.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Connétables. Thank you, officers, for coming to this hearing and declare it closed.